Jude Darling, new Labour MEP for the North East. A bit of background then about you. Where have you come from taking up this job as you will be in July?
Yeah, I'm originally from Middlesbrough, which is a spectacular place in the northeast, and with a proud tradition. And I've worked for the last 15 years in the trade union movement on industrial policy, employment rights, trying to push forward good jobs across Europe. So before being elected, I was Confederal Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation.
And are those some of the areas you're hoping to focus on in this jobs, areas like jobs and kind of employment rights? Are those your kind of key areas of interest, or where are you thinking you might focus your energy as an MEP?
Well, I think our top priority at the moment, and particularly as a North East MEP, has to be about employment. It has to be about jobs. We're the only region in the UK which has unemployment rates which are still rising. We have a catastrophic level of youth unemployment across the North East. And we have unemployment rates which are rising for specific groups like older women and so on, which mean that in our economy, really jobs is absolutely crucial. But how you create new jobs is by working with industry, with employers, public authorities, to create the framework which allows new industries, existing industries to develop and grow. And I think that's basically going to be one of my top priorities as an MEP.
How can Europe help with that as an objective? You say, creating new industries, creating new opportunities. How can the EU encourage that, nurture that?
I think there are a number of ways. The first is obviously nuts and bolts money. We as a region are more or less a net beneficiary of our EU membership. When you put together the public money that we get through European social, regional funds, research funds, together with the foreign direct investment that channels into the region, we actually are heavily dependent as a regional economy on EU membership. So there's a financial dimension which is about investment. That investment is coming because we're members of the EU, and it's at a time when Westminster is stripping money away from the North East. We can see that in council budgets and so on. So there's a finances side, but then there's a regulation side. Regulation from the European level actually is supporting the development of our industries in the North East. If you look at regulation around electric mobility, around the promotion of alternative forms of propulsion, and then you link that to what's going on around Nissan and the development of the Leaf and battery technologies, it's very clear that there's a link between what's done in this house in Brussels, creating the regulatory framework, and the promotion of local jobs in the North East. And to give the example of Nissan, that's about 27,000 jobs across the North East, but there are actually about 156,000 jobs across the North East which are directly dependent on our membership of the EU. So I think it's basically linking those financial resources, the investment that we get from our membership of the EU, together with the regulatory framework which promotes the development of jobs, and then the employment rights agenda is about the quality of those jobs. We want jobs for young and old people across the North East which allow people to have a decent standard of living, which allow good quality living and working conditions. That's crucial if we want an economy which flourishes in the future.
And you're obviously very in favour of benefits of the European Union for the region. That's what you've kind of just been outlining. How do you counter then the very strong performance of UKIP winning their first MEP, their first seat in the North East? Do you think that's partly due to the message that you believe from Europe not getting across?
In fact, the North East elections were quite interesting because Labour increased turnout, which meant that we brought back 2 Labour MEPs where we'd had one before. It was a massive success. And UKIP basically mopped up all of the parties which collapsed. So you've got to think that the last European elections, UKIP were within an inch of getting the third seat off the Lib Dems. Well, with the collapse of the Lib Dems, with the collapse of the BNP, they rose above that. But our vote, the Labour vote, actually increased in the North East. So it runs counter to the national story around UKIP and UKIP's approach. I think it was inevitable that they got the third seat. Our major success was knocking out the Tories, and in this European election it was Labour that defeated the leader of the European Tory party, Martin Callanan, and it was Labour that meant that he didn't come back to the European Parliament. That was a real achievement. What I think, and this is my experience from months and months on the doorstep, is that people are very economically insecure at the minute. And when people are economically insecure, then far-right groups are able to use very simple answers to very complex questions to inspire a kind of very simplistic response. That's what UKIP have been focusing on, and that's what their agenda is about. It's about dividing people in the region, and it's not about promoting an agenda which is good for the North East or people in the North East. It's a very Thatcherite agenda that UKIP are pushing, and that's not something that I think people in the North East ultimately will vote for.
Nonetheless, one of the three MEPs, UKIP, so how do you counter their arguments? How do you prove the people that did vote for them that if they're voting for them for Eurosceptic reasons, that Europe has benefits for the region?
Well, I think we have to demonstrate the value of our European membership far more concretely. I think sometimes it's poorly represented in the media in general, and then alongside that it's very often abstractly presented. So it's presented in broad terms, but not in what is benefiting you in your life as a consumer, as a worker, as a pensioner. And we need to get that message across, and Paul and I intend to spend our next 5 years really trying to get that message across in the North East. We have a few ideas about how to do it, but lots of it will be about engaging as very local MEPs. We might be here during the parliamentary week, but we'll be out on doorsteps in our spare time, and that's how you reconnect with people, is by talking to them, listening, hearing what their concerns are, and trying to represent those concerns in this House.